Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in this world today, actively participating in our Big Book 12-Step Workshop. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome, and please join us in the set-aside prayer, prayer for an open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, the 12 steps in you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, the 12 steps, and especially you. Join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. We've started step 1 in earnest. My experience over a 12-year period, 1984, when alcohol was removed, and then I came into AA, to about 1996, when I completed the work for the third time with a third Big Book step guide. I had 3 different experiences with the step 1. In the first 4 years, there was no real experience. It was a conclusion based on misinformation. I was an alcoholic because of drama. I didn't know, and nobody corrected me when I claimed to be an alcoholic because of all of the 502s, blackouts, and other embarrassing and costly events. That first time I went through the steps in 1988 with a man who knew what he was doing, himself had been taken through the steps and himself had had a spiritual awakening, a brand new experience, even though at that point he had been in AA for 25 years. And he brought me through the doctor's opinion like we're doing it, where I had an experience for the very first time of one ingredient that makes me an addict, and that is a defective body. At 4 years of sobriety, I went through this work that we're going through here and will finish today. And I realized that I had a biological problem, which made a lot of sense because I'd had some background in academia, so I knew about the biology, and I knew about DNA, and I knew about genetics. But that was it. I went through the balance of the work during that journey, 1988, and I had a very powerful spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening. I had both, mostly the awakening part, which meant that I was changed. Despite the fact I had a very limited experience with and understanding of step 1. 3 years later, I went through the steps again with another step guide, and he introduced me to the next assignment, which I'll be giving to you next week. I'm not giving you that assignment this week. I want to finish up with the body assignment as the follow-up assignment for next week. The assignment on the mind, obsession, and delusion. That's the second part of the complete understanding of what an addiction is. In the body, when I start, I cannot stop. And in the mind, when I stop, I cannot stay stopped. No, cannot, not will not, cannot stay stopped. Dash, that my life had become unmanageable. The first half of the first step contains what Dr. Silkworth says we have a body problem and a mind problem. The second half of the first step, unmanageability, is unpacked in a variety of places in the big book, none of which were the intentional structure by Bill Wilson to take a look at unmanageability. But the third journey through the step work at 10 years of sobriety revealed to me that unmanageability is the spiritual malady. Addiction is a problem. Unmanageability is the problem. But unmanageability isn't just a problem for addicts, it's a problem for human beings. More about that later. But that's the full panoramic view of step one. There's an illustration in the Way of Life document, I think it's on page 5 or 6 or 7, right in there, of the body and the mind and the will in a triangle. And then toward the end of the material in the Way of Life document, it might be page 13 or 14, that, I think it's 13, that has a triangle again, but fills in the part of the 3 parts of the first step. And that might be a helpful roadmap for each of you to take a look at. Not that you try to understand it. Please don't try to do that. But look at it like a roadmap. Oh, now that I've gone through the material on the body, I can see the words as listed here in this diagram, and they make a lot of sense to me. And now that I have a roadmap, I can see where I'm going. Even though I don't understand some of the words, I know that as we unpack the big book, I will be able to flesh out those words and have a complete understanding and experience. I make a distinction. I need to know it, understand it, and then connect it to my own history so that I can have an experience. The doctor's opinion was very clear. He has a primary opinion that we have a body problem. He uses a metaphor. He says allergy, not because he's a scientist diagnosing it with critical research. No, not at all. He's a psychiatrist that is trying to help people. But with his medical background, he says it looks like, it operates like, it has all the parallel dynamics of an allergy, a regular allergy. When you're exposed to cats, if you have a dander allergy, your eyes water, your throat closes, you find it very uncomfortable to breathe. It just happens because of the biological exposure to dander. Some people have a similar reaction to ingesting shellfish, although actually some people can die from that. It's that biological negative. So he's making a comparison of what he is observing. Once an alcoholic takes a drink, he loses control and drinks more than he intended. That's as simple as I can put it. And you'll note in the several places that we pointed it out, the chronology, the way the doctor uses craving. The craving never develops until after you have the first drink. When you put the alcohol into your body and the body begins to process it, the cellular structure converts the alcohol chemicals into the body chemistry, and that's a trigger where the cellular structure demands more of that chemical. It's a biological imperative, a biological mandate. Those are not words in the big book. I use them intentionally to give you a new understanding and a new experience with the power of this and the point of this step one comment that we're powerless, meaning no choice. Once I put the chemical in my body, I lose the power of choice. My biology then takes over. Now, we've used that similarly to understand drug addiction, whereas alcohol is probably a dysfunction. Alcoholic is a dysfunction of alcohol and the liver. Drugs are probably a dysfunction of the brain, some sense of reaction that the scientists really haven't got a descriptive handle on at this point. But there's lots of speculation that that's the source of the genetic reaction, similarly to the alcohol liver reaction. It appears that food might be a combination of some body part that doesn't process sugar properly or flour properly. In the same way, the alcohol creates an allergic reaction, using that in the broadly metaphoric sense. Some foods do the same thing to some people. I don't have a problem with sugar or flour, so it doesn't happen to me. Other people have a problem with sugar and flour, and they may have problem with peanuts, or they may have problem with dairy products, or they may have problems with quantity, both over quantity and under quantity. Very tricky addictions. And then there's the process addiction. There's no substance involved at all. Gambling, pornography, work, exercise, religion. Once I start, I cannot stop, is the only criteria here of the problem with the body. Bill tells his story, pages 1 through 8, that we looked at in terms of watching his spiral disintegration, bottoming out on page 8. That's where we stopped. We'll pick up the balance of the story in step 2. But we go on because the book has more to say about the problem of the body and the mind in general terms, pages 17 to 23. Bill makes the comments on page 17. The chapter is entitled, There is a Solution. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in a powerful cement that binds us. One element, common problem. But now he's saying down below in the next paragraph, we also have a common solution. That's the other element for identification, a way out. Join us in brotherly and harmonious action. Great news. The term gospel means good news. On page 18, he describes a little bit more of the bottoming out experience. Addiction. Along with it goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all those whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgust of friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, and sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. He gives a description there of what might look like somebody who could help. He doesn't use the word sponsor, but he could have from my standpoint. The paragraph in italics, you can read that on your own. a great description of saying that you can't really help somebody till you understand yourself. My sponsor said doing steps 4 and 5 is how we get to understand ourselves. And he said, it was his opinion, it's just an opinion, that you can't be a sponsor to somebody until you finish your 5th step, because you're communicating the disease rather than the good news. And the next paragraph really profiles what a legitimate helper, sponsor, step guide would be. Read it in that context. No rules, just a desire to help, as he says. Page 19, we feel the elimination of our addiction, the abstinence, is but a beginning. The real truth is we need to deal with our unmanageability and live by principles. I'm summarizing in my own words. How shall we present what has been so freely given to us? Page 19. We have concluded to publish an anonymous volume setting forth the problem as we see it. We shall bring to the task our combined experience and knowledge. This should suggest a useful program for anyone with a drinking problem. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints, and our respect for their opinions are attitudes which makes us more useful to others. Page 20, notice it wasn't about becoming happy and serene and useful, and successful. It was about becoming useful. On page 20, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help their needs. Bill projects that the unmanageability is the spiritual malady, and the nature of that is selfishness and self-centeredness. If that's true, and we'll see it as proposed in the big book later on, if self-centeredness is the problem, then other-centeredness is the solution, and that's the turning that Bill suggests we commit to in step 3 and implement by completing steps 4 through 9. Our desire to turn and our experience of being turned. That's my experience with this work. I made the commitment, I prayed the prayer, and I did the work because I wanted to change. I wanted to turn my life around. When I finished the 9th step and I looked back over my shoulder, I realized that although I had been willing to turn, the reality is that I was turned. Hear the spiritual awakening. Hear the power other than myself. I did a lot of work, absolutely. I got a lot of information, absolutely. I had a lot of experience, absolutely. But the outcome, the change, the transformation was disproportionate to my contribution to it. That's why Bill calls it a spiritual awakening and not just a psychological transformation. On page 20, he says, so what do we have to do to recover from this hopeless condition of mind and body? Bam, in that second paragraph. It is the purpose of this book to answer this question specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. Please hear the vocabulary. He doesn't say, we're going to tell you what we know. We're going to tell you what we thought. We're going to tell you what we discussed. We're going to tell you what we wrote. No, that's not what he said. We're going to tell you what we did. One of the more famous elders here in California died in 1984 when I came into the program, Chuck Chamberlain, and he would say, action is the magic word. I just love that. He gives us lots of looks at what a alcoholic looks like here on page 20 and 21. If you want an additional look at that, pages 108 to 110, will give you a very deep look at the 4 stages of deterioration as Bill outlines them. I believe it's in To the Wives, pages 108 to 110, 4 stages. He delineates the deterioration. You can see for yourself whether any of that relates to you and at what stage you might be if you're still in your addiction, or where you were when you got the freedom from your addiction with the gift of abstinence. The key is on page 21, the real alcoholic, he says, loses control once he starts. Hear it, allergy craving. Once I start, I lose control. A senseless series of sprees. On page 22, and we try different things, like not only with alcohol, but trying drugs. This was Bill's experience, this was Bob's experience. I'm not saying they were drug addicts, but they certainly used drugs, both of them, to attempt to deal with the problem they were experiencing with alcohol. Very clear on page 22, our behavior patterns vary. Why does he take the first drink? Common sense and willpower, not effective. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. Reinforcing the doctor's opinion. And he says, the experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. Of course, that's where the assignment stops, because Bill then makes the observation, well, if that were the only problem, then stop it. If that were the only problem, then stop it. Well, every one of us has had the success of stopping for a day or a weekend or a week or a month or a year or 10. The definition of stopping is stopping, not having a period of abstinence and relapsing. That's not stopping. The definition of stopping is stopping without relapse. A real addict cannot stop on their own power and cannot stay stopped on their own power. That's the whole point here. And so he says, so obviously the mind is the crux of the problem. And that will be the subject of our next time together. I want you to complete that questionnaire on the body, if you haven't already. And we'll talk today about that, as well as looking at it again next week, because it's really important that those who want to share their actual experience with the phenomenon of craving. Because as you share your experience, other people measure theirs by that, and or have a new information and or even a new experience with their own experience. And it's certainly the knowledge is important. Every one of you have expressed their gratitude about having new information, or at least a clarification of the information in the big book concerning craving and allergy and phenomena, the problem of the body. And that knowledge was important to me, but it was much more important for me to have my experience. And this man had me write out specific experiences where I lost control. I did not intend to have a second drink. I did not intend to stay in the bar till closing time. I did not intend to get drunk to the point that I blacked out. I did not intend that. And yet that was my cyclical periodic experience over a 20-year period, and I was never able to see it. The cyclical problem was the problem of the body. The not able to see it was the problem of the mind. We're being very arbitrary by separating them, but I believe it helps us get a deeper grasp and have a deeper experience with our no choice concept. So I'd like to chat with some folks today about their step one, body experience, interpretation of the doctor's opinion or Bill's commentaries from his story, pages 1 through 8, or his commentary 17 to 23. You can talk about the highlights that I've talked about in your own way, or you can talk about material that I didn't make any comment on. It's rich with lots of questions and comments and experience.
My experience was that I did answer the questions a few times. So I did kind of work through them after discussing them. I came back to them. And, you know, the first question for me was, you know, very much that thing of my experience of addiction is that it's instant, that my life becomes just food, sensation. I lose all connection. It engulfs me. And it's a cycle of death, really. It's like a living hell.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's a real, and a slow way to death. And then it leads to like suicide and suicidal thinking, or walking across the road and want to be hit by a bus. What happens when I indulge in it? What happens when I indulge in this, in the addiction? Those things. It's a slow way to death. I lose respect. I lose dignity. I lose.
See, all that is just story now. The real answer to the question, after you take the first bite, what do you do?
Oh, I just want more and more.
I take the second bite. That's the only answer.
Totally. It's pretty.
No, but you have to hear the simplicity of it.
Yep. Got it.
I take the second bite and it becomes a chain reaction.
That's it. Okay.
That's it. And see, the hope is that you can, the words are so simple, but the hope is that you can connect it to a whole chain of events over a long period of time, and you can see, oh my God, that's crazy. And yet it's my personal experience.
Yeah, I can see that. There's no story. You don't need many lines in this book.
There's everything after the first bite is just drama, totally predictable. And now it may not happen every time, and there are some people here like myself. I was able to take a drink and go back to work, take a drink and go home, at home have a drink and have dinner. I was able to do that even in the last year or two before I stopped. But of course, the periodicness of it was more frequent. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Yes. And with that, I mean, sure, I could go on a diet for a short amount of time or do something and, you know, get away with it, but it didn't come with that mental obsession or thinking about it.
Yeah, that'll be the issue that we'll begin to explore next week. So once you have this information that you lose control once you start, then the real question is, well, why do you start? That's not a question that we're going to explore today, but Bill is trying to keep us focused on the body problem that once I start, the doctor's opinion is, I'm lost. Once I start. Now that sets us up, of course, to have a new experience with, then why do I start in the first place? Because I know, or at least I experience suffering every time I do that. But the real question here is, what happens when I start?
Things like I'm looking at why I haven't been in a relationship, and some maybe behaviors in my thinking, and where I'm waiting kind of to talk about the unmanageability that I know you said we'll get to, but the things that I want to work on in my life today aren't so obvious at the moment. I'm excited to look at that, and I'm a bit anxious to go, what is it now? I want to fix it now.
Well, but see, what you're doing is wonderfully creative, is looking at, so what else in my life is a source of suffering, and is it in the category of addictive behavior?
Exactly.
And codependency is an addiction. I'm merely supporting you and dropping in a new word that a lot of people know about, but may not be exploring. And the way you talked, I felt that it might be a symbol that represents many of the dynamics that you were talking about, that you're not in a relationship, that you have other issues that are sources of suffering. I don't know what that is, but I want to support you and everybody else on the line that opening up your entire consciousness to these questions, not just with regard to your addiction. I'm so glad you pressed my button on this, that you're looking at it in any area of your life that's creating suffering and asking yourself, is the source of this another addiction?
Yes. Or is it
a process addiction is really what I'm referring to, which is, in fact, more difficult to identify.
Yes. Yes. And perhaps it's addiction, perhaps it's, who knows what level of addiction.
Well, it may not be an addiction. It might just be a way of thinking that's habituated, and it's just unhealthy.
Yes.
Because addiction and unhealthy habits are quite different.
Okay, great.
You can readily change an unhealthy habit with self-knowledge, self-development, and a little therapy.
Yeah.
But you cannot change an addiction through that.
And the other thing I was going to say, yes, because, you know, there was part of me that thought, when I chose to do this, I was like, oh, I should do SLA or something.
Of course.
And I thought, I better go and start a whole new program.
Yeah.
And then I chose to do this because I thought perhaps I don't need to do a whole new program. I just need to have a look at some of these things. And so I'm hoping.
It may be. I'm not saying it. First of all, I'm endorsing your questioning, but I'm not supporting going into another program at this point. But I am saying it's an alternative. I explored Al-Anon after 10 years in AA. I was married to an alcoholic woman. As I mentioned, she died 3 years ago. But at 10 years of sobriety, because I'm married to an alcoholic woman in recovery, I thought maybe Al-Anon, and for 6 months, I was serious. I went to 2 meetings a week, et cetera, et cetera. But I decided, like you're anticipating here, I probably need to just recommit to my program, my primary program, get to work in the steps. And I did that, and I did the steps again, and I found out what the problem was. Me, I was the problem. Oh, crap, not the answer I was looking for. I was looking for a new wife.
I'm pretty sure I'm the problem. And I too have been in FA since, 2005. And started in Al-Anon, both parents alcoholics, and did the steps in FA, and I did them in Al-Anon in FA. And I've also done, DA, because what comes from alcoholic parents, dysfunction, unmanageability around money, sex, love, relationships. And I've just been looking to fix.
And so your intuition concerning unmanageability is spot on. Because that's where the underbelly of all of this is in the area of unmanageability.
And I'm still not completely sure what you mean by that.
No, you're not, because we haven't done any work there yet. And so we will spend the concluding time today on the body, then move into the mind for next week and for a month. And then we will move into the will and spend 2 or 3 weeks there, and that's about unmanageability. So all I'm doing is saying, your instincts are good. You're very engaged. You're asking wonderful questions. Hold them.
Okay.
Be prepared to just hold them and allow the energy of an asked but unanswered question, very uncomfortable if you like closure like I do, but hold it to let it percolate and take you to a place that you don't even know exists. If you can hold off on any substantial decision, changing partners, changing homes, changing jobs, whatever, any substantial, if you can hold off until you finish at least your 5th step, maybe, and more preferably your 9th step, you will be making a better decision, because it will be more you that is making those decisions based on more reality that you will see by that time. There are some decisions that can't wait. That's just between you and your sponsor. What I am saying is, the first decision that I had to make that I was doing when I was doing this work was about my job, and I made it after I finished my 9th step, and it turned out wonderfully. The second decision was about my marriage when I worked the steps the second time. It turned out wonderfully. Both opposite what I started the steps for. I started the steps to keep my job, and I lost it. The second time I started the steps to lose my wife, and I kept her. So that's what I'm saying. I don't even know who I am until I finish the 9th step, and what the nature of the problem is until I finish the 9th step.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant discussion. Thank you.
I wanted to talk about the body. I wanted to talk about that because it's interesting to me. That's okay, the worksheet?
Yes, please.
Perfect. The question is, what is my experience with addiction? You know, I caught myself because I put complete powerlessness. And I was like, well, you didn't even know what that word meant prior to this. So I waited and I asked myself, because it says, what was my experience? And what I came up with was, I mean, as a lot of people know, I got sober really young, but I came up with, I got mad at somebody and I was like, I'm going to go have one kamikaze. And there were those little shots back in the 80s, right? And I was like, I'm going to have one. And I met my girlfriends and I had one kamikaze. I do not remember the rest of the night. And I got a DUI that night.
Oh, did you have more than the one kamikaze?
One would assume that I did, based upon the fact that my intention literally was to be late for this date and have one kamikaze. It's like, I'm going to go to the grocery store and get some bread and I'll be right back. That was seriously my intention. But the powerlessness over my body, once I had that one kamikaze. And then I thought, okay, well, that's a great, because I didn't remember that. And then the other one was, I could drink a whole bottle of wine and be completely sober. And then one glass of wine, I would be completely drunk. So it was already completely unpredictable by 21 when I ingested alcohol, what the outcome was going to be. And that's really...
Your body was becoming intolerant, actually.
Completely. And so what I did was, I couldn't figure out why, and I couldn't stop, and I just felt like a visitor in my own body. I did things that I had no intentions of doing, that were completely off my moral compass the minute I ingested alcohol. And I still am baffled by that.
Well, alcohol chemically is a depressant. But what does it depress? It depresses our inhibitors. That's why we use it at parties, so that we can be more free with our emotions and our body and our everything. All right? So it's, yes, when we drink excessively alcohol, it really suppresses those moral compasses that we would normally, even common sense, use. And we do things that we wouldn't otherwise have done. And sometimes we realize it and sometimes we don't.
Yes. I was a little more humbled by this than I thought, because I didn't even know. Again, I hear people saying they try to control. I never drank to control anything. It was on. So,
And I had a different experience. You were very young. I started drinking at 24 because I was in the monastery before then. But at 24, I began to drink alcoholically, immediately picked up where I left off at 17, which means that periodically I would pick up a drink intending to have one, and I would have way more than one. But regularly in the beginning, I could have the one or two and then do whatever it was I was going to do. I didn't lose control. But the vicious part of this is you never know when you're going to lose control when you're a periodic, or if in fact you're having a different experience, you don't actually know that it's going to happen, like you said. You had the kamikaze. Now, after the DUI, did you quit drinking or did you go to AA, or what was your experience?
yeah, so this was in 1980. Yeah, I did get sober. They told me statistically that if I didn't, I'd get my second DUI within 6 months. And so I started going to the bars trying to drink Diet Coke, and I did one night. I would see people at AA. I actually loved when I first started going to AA. I just thought it was gritty and gross, and I thought, oh, I love it. I love it because you could smoke, but it would take me another month to fully succumb. That the song of AA overpowered my wanting to continue to feel crappy all the time. So I gave it a chance. Yeah.
Well, let me ask something, because you just raised a question in my mind. So you had the kamikaze, you had the DUI, you had the embarrassing experience. Between your DUI and your abstinence, did you drink during that time?
Yes. Yes.
Did you lose control during that time?
You know, I think my body was so sick at the time, I couldn't overindulge. Yeah. Yes, I don't recall. Again, it's all really fuzzy, but I think my body was just so sick by then that when I tried to drink, I would get physically sick.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You must have really done a job on yourself. Right.
Yes.
Well, you were protected then, because if in fact you had processed it successfully, you might never have gone to or stayed in AA. So that was a real gift. But I guess the power of the one incident where you intended to have one drink and ended up in the DUI, that's a sufficient example of what we're talking about in terms of the biological imperative, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Once you start, you cannot stop.
Mm-mm. Well, I almost feel like too, I just kept getting caught after that. So when I went to the court, this guy's like, he's like, you might be cute and you have great eyes. He goes, but you're a fucking, sorry. He was like, you're a drunk. And as a result of that, young lady, I not only think you're not cute, you put 5 people in. That's how I kept being talked to. It was like, thank you that I finally got caught.
Yeah. People told you the truth rather than save your feelings.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel this year now finally understand my addiction. And I've been in food programs for 2.5 years. And because I've never done any disgusting things, I kind of didn't feel like I relate, or my addiction isn't that bad and I have some kind of control. So I would think, yeah, I'm an addict, but I am not. So I don't know why. And now I understand, because even me trying to find evidence that I don't have a food addiction is part of the addiction.
Yeah, you're trying to save your face here, right? So let me ask you, you have a suspicion, at least, that's why you're here, that you have an addiction. Is the addiction in the food area?
Yeah. And what was happening to me, like when I read that, that example that we try different strategies, like switching from wine to beer. This is what I did in terms of food. I switched from high calorie food to low calorie food. And because
why did you do that? But let me ask this. Why did you even switch? What was motivating you to switch?
In order to keep my weight in a healthy range.
Why were you having a trouble with your weight? Were you losing control when you ate?
Yeah.
Tell me about that specifically. What would happen? What would you be doing eating? What particular food, and what would happen?
So I would try not to eat until I get very, very hungry, and then I couldn't stop until.
Let's assume you're very hungry and you sat down to eat. What would you be eating?
Oh, it didn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what food it is.
What did you intend? You created a plate of food for yourself because you're really hungry, and you're going to eat that food. That plate of food what was your intention when you sat down to eat that plate of food? What was your intention?
To stop when the plate is empty.
And how did that work?
And then I got a second plate.
No, I knew the answer.
Yeah, of course you do.
Of course, that's what happened. Did it happen only once?
No.
But you did learn after the second time.
Yeah. No, of course no. I didn't learn it after years.
I've been doing this for a while. I know the answers. I'm trying to kind of bring it out of you. No. It happened the third time and the fourth time, and now I need to change my calories. Tell me how that worked.
Yeah, I'm just shocked that I couldn't see it for the whole year, and it's now just coming to me, that knowledge, and it's so obvious.
And not until you see it, it's not. The shock that I had at age 43, with a graduate education in philosophy, theology, and psychology. And I had trained to be a psychologist. I had lots of therapy. I was trained to be a therapist. The biggest shock was not that I was an alcoholic. The biggest shock was I had never seen it. I had never seen it. And I'm sensing that you're having some of that new awakening now.
Yeah. And it's kind of a big relief, because now I don't need to understand, I don't need to control it. I can just surrender it, and my higher power can take over.
Yes. In fact, you can't control it.
Yeah.
On your own power. I cannot control my alcohol. It's not because I'm a bad person, but because I have a genetic predisposition. Once I take alcohol, I can't control it. And here's the really nasty part, and we'll look at that next week. We'll begin to look at it, is even stopping for 90 days and committing to stopping, I start again. Did you ever have a period of control of a weekend or a week?
Yeah, I had control for 2 years, and this is where my mind goes back all the time, and it doesn't matter how long ago those 2 years were.
And so we'll be exploring that with you when we look at the mind problem. You had 2 years, so you were successful in doing your diet, but this isn't about diet, is it?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Diane.
And what this exercise brought up for me, actually, Herb, was a lot of sadness, and mixed feelings of shame, sadness, compassion as well. Because
that's nice. That's great. When you get the compassion, because you connect to the powerlessness of it, that you were defeated before you even started, and you didn't know it, and that's why you tried so hard.
Yeah, and for me, my food addiction was present as a child. I'm not sure at what point I crossed over from being a little girl that loved food to a little girl that used food. Like, I can't pinpoint that.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I've been there. It's been with me for as long as I can remember.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
hear people talk about crossing the invisible line, and I understand that. My wife had that experience. She had no alcohol till she was 21, good Catholic Irish girl that she was. And that was her experience. Progressively, by the time she was 30, she was, in fact, probably addicted and an alcoholic. I was 12. My very first drink was a blackout drunk.
wow. Yep.
Yeah. So there was no invisible line for me. So it's once again, Bill just said it, I read it, our behavior patterns differ.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was a binge drinker too as a teenager. I was a binge anything.
Right.
I was a binger at everything that I did.
And the trick here is distinguishing between age-appropriate experimentation and peer pressure on the one hand, and legitimate addiction on the other hand. That's a tricky one.
Yeah. I just know that my primary addiction, the one that I had the most trouble with, was food. Like anything else I did was in order to stop the food.
Got it.
So, for example, like where it's like, what is my history of attempts to deal with it, to stop after I start? Well, the most extreme thing I did was develop an addiction to methamphetamines.
Yeah.
Because that was a power greater than my food.
I love the energy.
Right?
I just didn't like what I felt like after that had all worn off. I literally took the methamphetamine for a little while, but then I didn't like the feeling afterwards, so I just stopped it. See, I'm not a drug addict. I would take a little cocaine during my drinking time so that I could drink longer, but I never went looking for cocaine. Yeah.
I was a top-up addict in that sense. I don't think I know what it felt like to come down. I was always like that.
Yeah.
But that was something that I did to control. That
sounds like that's your DNA personality. Just listening to you here, you have a lot of wonderful energy. So I imagine you apply that to everything that you do.
Sometimes successfully and sometimes a little bit erratically.
The truth. Yes, yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Is looking at unmanageability, because that's the resolution to managing and containing that energy.
Yeah.
A fire on the prairie is devastating. A fire in the stove is wonderful. Unmanageability, dealing with it, allows us to contain the fire and make it productive. Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful picture. One of the purposes of meditation is to channel the fire into the fireplace. Yeah.
Well, story is, once I start, I can't stop. I'm a person of extreme.
How long did that go on?
I seriously am the youngest of 7 of a food addict family.
Yeah.
Hands down. I had a brother who died of Pickwickian syndrome. That's where the weight of your body crushes your respiratory system.
Oh my gosh.
It's an extreme form of sleep apnea.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just hands down DNA, and I'm a biologist with an emphasis of human disease. I totally get the body. I totally get the allergy.
Yeah.
I mean, when you talk alcohol, alcohol is sugar and a grain fermented.
Yeah.
I can't eat sugar and flour. And flour in my body turns into a sugar.
I'm sure there's a correlation. Yes.
There's a strong correlation. I have no problem with the body. You put it in me, and yeah, I can give you the drama, but I won't.
Well, but how long were you conscious of the cycle of taking it and losing control?
Yeah, I mean, I started young, and I was conscious that I couldn't control it. And also conscious and unconscious. I knew once I started, I couldn't stop. But almost.
How long was it? 1 year or 20 years or?
Oh, I didn't come into program till the age of 42.
That's not my question.
But okay, I'm
not my question. My question is, how many years were you aware of the cycle of once you began, you couldn't stop?
at least 20 years. At
Thank
least
you.
20
Let's
years.
just go with that. I mean,
All right. Yeah, okay.
I'm not keeping records, so I don't really
No,
care.
no.
But I want you to answer it so that we can explore it with the balance of the group, so that they can answer it themselves, asking themselves this question. So for 20 years, you were conscious that once you began, you couldn't stop. Did you try to stop after you began?
Yeah, I tried to control it. I couldn't.
Good.
I could
All
not
right.
control my eating. And it was very progressive with me, and that was obvious.
So here's the next question then. Did you have a time where you were conscious of the cycle and with your willpower not start for a while?
No, I always started.
There you go. All right.
I always started.
All right. See, that's my wife. That was my wife's experience. She was a chronic. That wasn't my case. I quit for a weekend. I quit for a week. I quit for a month. I quit for January. I quit for Lent. All through a 20-year period, I was able to quit regularly for long periods, 90 days at one point. But I always started again.
Yeah, no doubt I always started.
Now, I'm glad we pursued that, because there are people on the call that had both experiences. Some had the chronic, no, I never stopped. I was never able to stop starting. And others were, yeah, I stopped regularly during a diet period. I stopped. But I always started again. Because I'm setting us up now for the call for next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keep doing the same thing over and over again.
I understood that part. That's the
Yeah.
nature of addiction. But what was the theme that you said was the reason for your recurring cycle?
The dishonesty.
Yes. Yes, the big book is absolutely right. Chapter 5, as he begins, he spends several sentences and a couple paragraphs on the importance of rigorous honesty.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. With ourselves and with others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was just around the food.
Yeah. Tell me about that. No,
well,
come on.
Well, I was talking to my sponsor one day, and I mentioned to her that I had gone shopping, but I had left the bags in the car because I didn't want my husband to see them. And she said to me, well, that's a form of dishonesty. You know.
And one of my teachers, you've probably heard me say it before, and you will hear me say it before our time is up in the year-long workshop. One of my teachers says, what we do any one place, we do every place.
Yeah.
Now, you may not be aware of it, but you're beginning to be aware that dishonesty is one of your core mechanisms for coping with getting what you want.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And yet it
sometimes
doesn't
it
do
works.
what you want, does it?
Yeah. No, not always. No.
That's wonderful.
I feel like I've really resonated with what a lot of other individuals have shared in terms of this idea of, like, I've asked myself, okay, looking back over my experience, when did I have control? I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I'll really ask myself that question. When did I have control? But I realized I've never had control. And the last sentence you've just had about the fantasy of having control, that's what I've had my whole life.
That's it.
And it's funny how right now I kind of feel a little bit like dumbstruck, because I'm like, but this, what about that? What about, but I realize, like, I've substituted.
Yeah.
And it's those moments of substitution where I've gone, oh, I've been able to control it, but it hasn't. It's when the food hasn't been an issue. Relationships have been the thing that's been holding me together. And then when the relationship doesn't work, back to food. And then I find creative exercises that I'll just get obsessed with. And then when I see that that's not working anymore, I go back to food. And there's always just been this cycle. And it's been the movement between those cycles that I've confused for having control over. But I don't know, the idea of, have I ever controlled food? Or when did I realize I didn't have control? I've never realized until I found
Yeah.
12-step.
Yes.
Like it was when I was doing my 4th step in a different fellowship, and I had one of my trigger foods next to me eating whilst I was doing my 4th step. I was
Absolutely.
like, it's been food. It's been food. I'm 35 and it's been food my whole life. I've never seen it.
Yeah.
But then suddenly I realized how all my thoughts have always been about food, always been about diet mentality.
Yeah.
And then also how I can't get rid of that lens.
Yeah.
Even now, like with abstinence, like I say I'm abstinent because I'm abstaining, but even then it's like every single day I have unmanageability, and I see it and I can't do anything about it. You know, it's not as bad as it was, but it's there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
One of the moments that I had, just like yours, was when I was very clear that I had a drinking problem. I was 43 years old, and the hospital had asked me to ask myself some questions and to write out a little autobiography of my relationship with alcohol, which I did bullet points, and then I read it to a group in that hospital program. My wife was in the hospital program for her alcoholism. I was there to support her, and they were trying to help me help her, they said. They tricked me. And as I wrote it out, and then as I read it out, I became aware that I had a drinking problem. And I wasn't shocked that I had a drinking problem. It did explain an awful lot of my past and my behavior. What I was shocked, like you, I was shocked that I had never seen it. I'm 43 years old. I have a graduate education in philosophy, psychology, and theology. I have spent my entire life reflecting on me with professionals. And I had never seen the real source of my problems. I was like totally embarrassed, but in a state of shock. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a moment of grace when we wake up to a new truth like that. Yeah.
Just this voice in my head that has impatience about it as well. You know, it's like.
Yeah. Well, that helps a lot, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't at all. But then, yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I guess, you know, you have to see it first and accept it before moving forward.
Well, see, and that's how we're built. We need to know something before we can do something. That's the order of things. That's why we do need to get information about the problem, the real source of the problem. Then we can take effective action to deal with the problem. But if I don't know better, I can't do better. But just because I know better doesn't mean I'll do better.
Yeah.
So next week, we're going to look at knowing better and realizing that even knowing better, we're powerless to do better. And that's why step 11 is so powerfully structured. And it was what gave me the insight concerning the brain structure and the structure of the steps, because it ends praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to do it.
In the doctor's opinion on page 29, is it 29? It says, as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. And I want to say that because one of your questions was, what's your personal experience with addiction? And I want to say that I came into the program, you know, to 12th step as a marijuana addict, and I can 100% say that that obsession was lifted years ago, and same with alcohol. And it just baffles my mind that this ism has found its way now. And I know a lot of people are talking about food, but it's there for me too. And I'm not, if you look at me, I'm not very overweight. It's very hard for me to say, I'm an addict, even though I haven't gone to the extremes of like with my pot smoking and the awful things I did, or with my drunks. But
but the question, it's really important to ask the right question.
Okay.
Addiction is not about the behavior. Addiction is not about the feelings. Addiction is not about the thought. Addiction is about the engagement with the substance or process. So there's only one question that we're looking at here. What do you see as your primary, I'll use the term addiction. Why are you in a 12-step program?
My primary addiction was marijuana.
All right.
Absolutely.
So did you ever have an experience of losing control, using more marijuana than you intended?
Every day.
Tell me about what was your thinking? How were you going to control it?
I would put it off in the morning to make it as late as, I would say, not yet, not yet, not yet. Eventually smoke, which was usually late morning. And the first thought I had as the substance reached my brain was, note to self, don't wait so long next time.
All right. So all right.
Yeah.
So but once you started, what was your intention? What were you going to do? Were you going to smoke one? I don't know exactly how you deal with it, but is it smoking?
Yes, smoking.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Were you going to smoke one, or were you going to smoke six, or what was your criteria of what you were going to do?
I was just going to smoke a little. The rest I would hide in different places.
Yeah.
And I had a toddler,
right.
So I had
Right. Were you able to smoke a little and then stop?
Nope.
Did that happen more than once or twice or three times?
Yes.
Over what period of time was it a regular failure on your part?
I would say over a 2-year period of time when it was at its height. And
how often did you smoke?
Every day, from morning till night. And
did you lose control every day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There? Wow. So that's a chronic addict.
Yeah. It was, they say wake and bake. And, until I would fall asleep at night.
No, I have never heard that. So, because I'm not in the drug world. Yeah, no.
And
Shake
when it
and
wasn't
bake,
around, me
Oh,
too.
Yeah.
When it wasn't around, it was alcohol, so.
Well, okay, so let's go there for a minute then.
Yeah.
So, did you have a problem with alcohol?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah? Tell me about how do you determine problem?
Because I couldn't stop. I would put that one off till evening, till like making dinner time, and pour a big glass of whether it was tequila or vodka or something added with sugary juice. And it was never just one. It was never just
did you have a second one and then stop then?
Tough to say because I was smoking pot at the same time. So it was a balance. And then,
Oh, tell me about the balance.
A fine art.
Tell me about the balance. How often did you achieve balance?
No, Herb. I was miserable. I was miserable.
I know the answers.
Yeah.
You see, you said I was attempting to achieve balance. Did you ever achieve the balance that you wanted?
No.
No.
And one more thing.
Overshoot. Huh?
One more thing. I was working at that time and I couldn't go more than 1 hour without smoking, but I had these 5-hour shifts and I used to smoke in the spa and then try to hide it and then work on my massage clients. And finally they fired me.
Wonderful. No. You were very relaxed trying to relax them.
I was.
Yeah, right. All right.
But that was a long time ago. Yeah.
Well, it's all right. But you have now though a connection between what I'm talking about in terms of this is biology.
Yeah. And I never got that really until now. It always turned me off, the thing about the allergy. And I'm like,
Because most people just don't spend some time unpacking it. It might be very tedious to some people, but these are the kind of questions that I was asked myself, and I had to come to it so that I actually had a visceral experience. Oh my God. I was 4 years sober.
yeah.
I didn't know until the man spent the time with me like I'm spending with you. I mean, he was a real drill sergeant, you know, just pounding on, what's your experience, Herb? What did you drink? When did you drink? How much did you drink? What was your intention? And I had to write it out. I had to talk it out. And eventually oh my God, I regularly lost control. I mean, literally.
My intention was never to drive high with my son and his little friends in the car.
Sounds like my wife. And when she started then driving high and drunk, she finally put herself in a hospital because that had gone over the edge for her. I never knew any of that. I was busy living my life.
Thank you very much.
I maintain an abstinence from flour, sugar quantities, as well as from artificial sweeteners, which for me cause me to have problems. So I look at them also as I have an allergy. And I know that because I once had been abstinent from artificial sweeteners. This is before I was in the program, when I was messing and trying to control everything. I had tried to be abstinent from artificial sweeteners for probably about 9 months, and I did a really good job. I went to a party, went out on the deck, opened the cooler up, reached in, pulled out a Diet Pepsi, drank it, and then didn't stop the whole rest of the night and just was appalled, ashamed. I went home, I ate the entire house. And that just always strikes me.
It pulled the trigger.
It pulled a trigger, and I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. My car couldn't stop. My car had the same problem I did. I couldn't drive past a Wawa or it's like a fast food place without stopping in the morning to get a sandwich, even though I'd already had breakfast, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to do it, but I still would do it. So,
And it's that kind of specificity that really helps you have an experience, but it helps other people all to get more specific. The more specific we get, all right, I can remember a luncheon just before Christmas in a business meeting one-on-one. And the guy had asked me, a vendor, if I had time for lunch. I said, I'm really busy. I've got lots of deadlines, but I do have an hour and 15 minutes. Let's go to the local place. We'll have lunch. We sat down. He said, shall we have a Christmas drink? I go, okay, just one though, because I've got to be back in the office in an hour and 15 minutes. He said, great. We had our drink. We had our lunch. We had coffee. And he said, it's Christmas and you've only been here an hour. You have 15 more minutes. How about an after lunch Christmas drink? I said, okay, 15 minutes. Good. I've got to go. We were there till 8 o'clock that night. And then we went to an after hours place until 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, isn't that what you were just describing?
Yeah. It's funny how your priorities get all rearranged.
I get amnesia. I get complete amnesia.
Right.
The drink hijacks me.
It's just sad when it starts to affect your family and your kids and your job. So, yeah, absolutely no control. Thank God. I don't have control, but thank God with the practice and the measures that I take and the spiritual condition, which I firmly believe that, that daily reprieve based on your spiritual condition.
And you create habits of perception, you create habits of behavior and consciousness. Part of this is good psychology and just good training also, but there's a component, an X plus mysterious component that I can't explain.
Yeah, and even with
that keeps us in the abstinence.
Even with tons of behavior and tons of, reinforcement and tons of years, you still, today I was thinking, I was making something for my husband. I would love to have eaten it, but I couldn't, and I'm thinking, I'm always just that close, and that, but I'm glad that I can make it for him and be okay doing it. I couldn't have done it years ago.
Because that's the freedom that comes. I have cold beer in my refrigerator. I have since I got sober. My son, who doesn't seem to have any problem, likes a cold beer when he visits.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't give it any thought. It's just there. Now, some people don't do that for lots of good reasons. I have no problem with that either. Yeah. Thanks.
The process of figuring out how my sex addiction works with the physical allergy has been very informative, and I have been because it's a process addiction, identifying the physical components of it has definitely, at first I was completely resistant to it and was like, it's completely mental, there's nothing physical happening. But I have been able to identify with my addictive behaviors, there are points where there are physical sensations that are similar to sort of a manic episode, that where I get tunnel vision and there is a physical sensation that takes over the body.
Well, you're really digging into it. That's wonderful. What do you feel is the trigger event? Like when I take a drink, that's the trigger event. What's the trigger event for you?
I've had a harder time identifying that aspect. There's several different bottom line behaviors I have that would constitute a relapse, so I think that one of them involves being in my car. And so obviously being in my car at any time is not relapsing, but when I make the decision, I don't know if you're familiar with the circles that we use in SBA.
Yes.
So I guess when I am in the middle circle and I say I'm driving aimlessly and I don't know where I'm heading to, that's a major middle circle behavior. But there's a point during that behavior where something physical does flip, and I lose the ability to redirect my actions, and I completely lose the ability to change my direction, and it then becomes inevitable that I'm going to enter into the inner circle behavior.
Yeah. See, and I think that's a articulate way of describing the trigger. Yeah, for you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not so much as clean as taking a drink, but there's a sequence of either thoughts or feelings or actions that create a sequence at some point where you have no control. Yeah. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're taking it, attempting. I encourage people, like in a process addiction, to try to get the words and the experience that parallel the drug and the food and the alcohol trigger event. So
I just wanted to add, I don't need to dig into it too much right now, but there's something I'm working through that someone had mentioned last night. I have a lot of experience in AA as well. I was sober for 2 years in AA about 8 years ago, and I thought I identified that it was more of an unhealthy habit, and sex addiction was really the core for me. But I just wanted to put that out there as something I'm still working through.
So you've raised the question because you've now been drinking between today and 6 years ago then.
Right, but I don't drink anymore. I've kept it as simple as that it negatively affects my ability to stay sober in SAA.
A lot of food addicts have the same attitude. A lot of Al-Anons have the same attitude, and that is both from a substance standpoint that's not alcohol or from a process standpoint that's not a substance. They find that alcohol depresses their inhibitors, which then allows them to be uninhibited, which then leads to trouble. And so nothing good comes of it. Even if you only have a habit or as you said, an unhealthy habit, it still lowers your defense mechanisms, which is the point of alcohol, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. But stay open to it and see what your experience is as we get then into the next piece of work on the mind, because that could actually be more revealing to you than even the body chemical part.
Well, I'll share number 5. How honest have I been about my food addiction with others or myself, my efforts and failure? I've wanted abstinence for 30 years. The 30 years I've been in food programs, but I've been dishonest telling myself I can get away with a little extra food. You know, it's just like, I can have that. I won't have to tell my sponsor. But it's that one green bean that gets me in trouble every time, and I tell myself that lie.
Well, it's not the green bean. It's the anytime that you think the thought, I won't tell whoever, I won't tell. The moment you have that thought, you know that you're doing something that in your heart of hearts is not in alignment with your commitment.
Correct. Now, how does that fall into the we don't know what we don't know, and we don't see what is that what I'm doing?
That's the right question also, and that's why we do prayer and meditation, to improve consciousness.
Okay.
Because in fact, we get hijacked by those thoughts. That's what we're going to see in the mind work that we're going to be doing next week, is the beginning of really unpacking that we have no choice and we are powerless, because we actually believe that it's okay as long as I don't have to tell on myself because it's no big deal. I believe that even though it's a lie, and even though it never has worked, and I think you said for 30 years, it may not have been that entire time, but over a long period of time, it never works, but we don't learn from that. Yeah.
Well, it's been a dishonesty thing all my life, for sure. Maybe not with food. It's, you know, my amends in my alcohol and drug program were financial amends to people I had stolen from. And it's just shameful because, you know, you always hear, I hate a thief. And then here I am, a liar and a cheat and a thief. And maybe I need to just set that aside and go with an experience and continue to do the work.
For sure there, you've heard me say it, but I don't believe it's been in a conversation that we've had, so it might have even more sting or meaning in bringing it to your attention right now. But one of my teachers says, what we do any one place, we do every place. So it's no surprise to me if you lie with your food, if you're dishonest with your food, that you're dishonest in many other areas of your life. This little shading, get away with it. I can get away with it. Mm-hmm. That probably has saturated your very being.
Yeah, and it's just being of good moral and raised by a good grandfather, and it's just not in alignment with my belief, but yet here I am, you know, the actor.
That's where prayer comes in, and that's where accountability comes in. We pray in the 7th step because we're powerless, but the man said, you call me every day and tell me how you're behaving with regard to that character defect. Mm-hmm. It's very powerful combination. Prayer, because you're powerless. Accountability, because you're human.
I've been transparently honest with my sponsor, and that's very freeing, but I'm a work in progress.
Aren't we all? That's
yes,
right.
Sir.
And there's a humility in a wonderful sense that comes with that. All right. You're just a work in progress, and it's okay to be who you are today with the hope that you'll be a better man tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I was going to talk about some of my writing that I did on pages 17 through 23.
Good.
Okay. And it talked about the fellowship and how that's such a positive, strong friendliness and intimacy and understanding that's indescribably wonderful, and I agree. And I have had a lot of relapse as a food addict, and I have stayed, and mainly because of the fellowship. And I've never looked at a sponsor as really being someone to help me. You said in one of the workshops, get a sponsor that will help you. And I was like, are you kidding? That's just a person for me to lie to. You know, they're trying to control it. And I'm adult children of alcoholic, and, you know, authority figures are big trouble, and abandonment's another issue. So they're going to tell me what to do, and if I don't do it, they're going to leave me. And
you have a lot of stories, don't you?
I do. And just let me hear me through. So
I will.
Thank you. I'm almost as old as you. Anyway,
what made you achieve it?
Yeah. Anyway, I called my sponsor and I said, look, because I don't ever see her and she doesn't know how fat I am. And so I said, I'm 40 pounds overweight and I need more help because I'm only talking to her 15 minutes a week. And so I was shocked. She said, I don't have more time for you, but I will find you a food sponsor. So she did. And I gave up all caffeine, all the stuff on Wednesday, and I thought I was going to die. I mean, die. I wish I could have died. It was so bad. And then the next day, a little bit, I mean, caffeine, the withdrawal, the sugar.
So caffeine is horrible. That's right.
It was nasty. And
it is.
I felt like the flu. I took 3 naps a day. I'm now on my 3rd day, and I just don't want to ever do this again, but I'm already, like you were talking to that gentleman on the first go round about when you start to lie. And I've been lying since kindergarten, you know, and cheating. And I'm good at that. But I can't believe how many times I walk around wanting a hit. I want the dried fruit with the nuts. I want a piece of fruit. I want anything to pick up my energy or my mind or my boredom or anything. And it's just nasty. And I don't know if this is recovery, you know. Well, I guess
what you're experiencing is detox.
Yeah.
And detox comes before recovery. And it can be short or long, and it's always painful. By definition, you're having withdrawals in your cellular structure from something that it's been habituated to physically. So paint a picture of the vision and the benefit so that you have something visceral that you can kind of like hold on to, knowing that, see, today is Friday. I bet you it's a lot better than Wednesday.
It is.
And Sunday is going to be a lot better than today.
Yes.
And when you make it visceral and you create the vision of the benefit and value of why you're doing this, it's like surgery. I've had 3 major surgeries. I don't like surgery, but I really like the results.
I do feel enormously hopeful, and I feel so in love with my sponsor. I just want to have her till I die. She's kind, but she's very strict. It's an amazing combination, and she is helping me, just like you said. And so that part is just extraordinary, really.
I am so delighted with this conversation, because I don't believe I've had any conversation that's put some color into the sponsorship relationship that's been quite as effective as this. And I know that it's helped a lot of people.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that.
So I was thinking about the examples, in the body. I asked for 3 examples. And I was thinking way back about the examples. And one of them was on my wedding day. And there was cake, as always is. And I remember having a nice bit of cake with the guests. And then the hotel staff cut the bottom tier and put it on the table, on the buffet table. And I remember going back and just eating the cake, like had my back to the guests and eating cake. And then I would pretend to have some chicken and then eat 3 or 4 pieces and then come back. And I was thinking, yeah, I just like cake. The cake is really nice. So, it's my wedding cake and it's really nice cake. So then
how many times am I going to get married? I'm going to eat some goddamn cake.
Right? And then we went up to the hotel room and I put cake in my handbag because it was my wedding cake. It was really nice. And then, but at that stage, I already knew that my eating was different. And it was weird, and there was shame around it because I'm a closet eater, and so nobody really sees me eating. And I always thought it was from trauma. It was like, yeah, if you've had my
and it may be. So what?
Well, that was the thing. When I joined the program, I noticed that people with trauma have food issues, and people without trauma have food issues. So that's like the lie I tell myself. If you had my past, you'd eat, to make yourself feel better.
Absolutely. If you had my father and my wife, you'd drink too.
So it was interesting having to do the events, and and then I was looking for the symptoms, what actually happens to the body. And I know a big one for me is disassociation. So I literally leave the body and I have this thing looking down on myself. And that is, in FA, we say we got to pause. We pause before we take the first bite. And me and the pause have been struggling for 1.5 years because how do you disassociate and how do you pause? There's just no connection there.
Well, and you're going to have a different experience, I believe, with this journey through the steps in the next assignment with the mind, because we're going to address that. It's nice and it's wonderful suggestion about the pause, all right? But it doesn't work.
It doesn't. And I get frustrated because, they say, did you pick up the phone to call a fellow? Yeah, well, I did, and then I still went to eat. Oh, no, I didn't. Did you
exactly
pray?
Right. If you had, see, here's the flaw, the misunderstanding. If you had the power to pause and call a sponsor, you're not powerless.
Right.
So what you're having is a thought, not an obsession. But I don't want to get too deep into it right now, but let me just say, you're raising some wonderful questions for yourself that will give you a whole new experience with what we will unpack on the mind. And then when you're sharing your experience, it will probably be very helpful to other people.
Okay, because my issue is the pause issue. And I really like the sharing on the tunnel vision. I thought, oh yeah, that's also a tunnel vision thing that happens to me. So, yeah.
One of the lines, just to maybe help capture the spirit of what you're talking about, it's the main issue with regard to addiction, what you're talking about. In Fred's story in the assignment, he uses a phrase, the strange mental blank spot. See, there's no pause.
Mm.
If you had the power to pause, you're not powerless.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to share this whole process addiction. It has me fascinated. And I was a little bit confused by it. I actually had to look up the definition, the body part of process addiction. So I looked up process, phenomenon, addiction. And I was looking at my history. I was, as a young girl, just always drawn to crisis. You know, give me some trauma, drama, crisis situation. I'm your girl, you know. I'll mediate, I'll control, I'll organize, I'll do whatever it takes to be busy, busy, busy. And that's, you know, my adrenaline kicks in. And what I'm seeing is, you know, all of these behaviors are processes that I did because I didn't know what to do with feelings, you know, with situations, with relationships. It took the focus off of me. And then what happens is, I find myself with this behavior at, 60 years old of, people pleasing, codependent, obsessive compulsive behavior. And then I try to control it and I can't, because I don't know any different. And I develop fear and resentment and anxiety. And then that's where the substance addiction comes in, whatever it might be, the cigarettes, the food, the alcohol. But that substance addiction took me to being 100 pounds overweight and suicidal. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of this and to learn something new and to even be able to think about and take apart a little bit what process addiction is in the body. So thank you.
Well, but see, you gave a really colorful chronology of the development of addiction, starting with the tension that came from this codependent and whatever else terms that you used at a very young age. And then in order to help you reduce that tension, you got into some substance addiction kinds of things. I mean, that's why I suspect, and I haven't actually done enough work to know that it's true, but I suspect that codependency is the underbelly of an awful lot of addiction. Yeah.
So I was just saying, at a young age, I knew that food was problematic, but I didn't really have anybody to talk to about it. And everybody thought I was a weird kid, because I would do things like refuse to have a birthday cake.
Right.
Refuse the foods that everybody was eating, little kids
Sure.
look forward to and stuff like that.
Because you knew that there was some devastation on the other side of it.
Right. And I just remember hating holidays because there was all that kind of food around that was going to make me crazy. Yeah. And I remember actually when I got into my 20s, not wanting to go home for holidays and my mother just being devastated, but I just couldn't manage myself around the food and stuff like that, and alcohol by that time. So I definitely, so why did I keep going back to the food and stuff like that? I think it's because even though I just didn't have enough confidence in my analysis and I didn't have enough support, and it was like trying to fit in, and sometimes certain types of food I ate addictively, but they didn't make me sick. So I don't know, and I sort of did kind of controlled it. I never had a weight problem to speak of. Maybe at one point I was 20 pounds overweight, but it was the consequences of my eating, the depression, the feeling out of control, and all that kind of stuff. So, and it definitely made my life unmanageable. Then now I've come to see that there's a lot of things. There's, I don't know if they're underlying causes or whatever it is, but there's a lot of things that make my life unmanageable. And if it's really causing me lots and lots of pain, sometimes I'll just go through the whole 12 steps on that one particular situation.
All right. Yeah.
I'll say I'm powerless over my son, and my life is unmanageable, and then I'll just take it through the whole 12 steps.
Yeah.
That sometimes gives me some relief. But I definitely, I was also an alcoholic. Though I was never able to drink volumes of alcohol, it was really clear to me that I couldn't drink in safety without it causing problems, and I still continue to do it. I'm not quite sure by that time. I know why I kept doing it then, I guess, because I had knowledge of it. I had knowledge by the time I was in my late 20s. I had knowledge of alcoholism, and I had knowledge of food addiction, and all kinds of denial, wanting to be like everybody else, and being young. When if I go to AA meetings, they were like that was back in the 70s. They'd be like a lot of older men, and just me, this little 20-something, young person, stuff like that.
They were glad to see you.
So it was kind of odd. And then the codependency issues too. So I'm a big 12-stepper. I'm in 3 programs, and I'm not afraid to go to another program. Maybe not to go to meetings regularly, but anytime I have a problem with something I can't figure it out, I know that the 12-step groups have figured it out. Like
are you? Let me ask a couple of questions then. Thank you very much for the broad view. Are you abstinent from alcohol?
Yes.
How long have you been abstinent from alcohol?
40 years.
There you go. Are you abstinent from food?
Yes.
For how long?
About 1 year and 9 months.
There you go. Now, can you see any parallel between alcohol and food? Once you start, you cannot stop?
Oh yeah, I definitely did. So even though I didn't have a big weight problem, I would know it. I can remember what my brain was telling myself. Okay, you've got that in the freezer. You want to have some, so I'd have some. Then I think, well, I might as well just eat the whole thing right now.
Well, see, but here I'm curious. When you quit drinking 40 years ago, was it because you went to AA?
Yes. Well, first I went to Al-Anon.
Okay, all right. You went to Al-Anon, and then you're in a 12-step program, and then you went to AA. And how long have you been in AA? Or well, I'm assuming you were in AA at one time, and whether or not you are still is irrelevant. But how long ago did you engage in AA?
Well, 40 years ago.
Oh, okay. All right. So despite the fact you're in AA, you couldn't deal with your food problem using the tools of AA, right?
Well, I did for a while because I went into OA.
No. You see, but you're just confirming my question, because I said you couldn't apply the tools to your eating problem. I didn't mean for a week. I meant for 40 years.
Well, I did it for years. I did do it for years.
But how many years? Let me try this. How many years?
I think I had at least 2 years of abstinence from flour and sugar.
Okay, so that's hardly major success in contrast to 40 years of sobriety.
Right. Well, the other thing, too, it's a progressive thing. And if I don't have specific support for that substance, what happened a couple of years ago, I was just like, I just couldn't handle it by myself anymore.
Our patterns of addiction and our patterns of recovery are so different, and that's why I wanted to kind of ask those other illustrative questions.
Right.
And again, reinforcing that you need to know something before you can do something, and you really didn't understand the nature of the food addiction.
Well, I don't know if I didn't understand it or if I just didn't. it didn't seem to be as serious as drinking. And since I
There
could
you
control
go.
it most,
There you go.
I could control it most of the time.
Right.
Yeah, but it was progressive in that,
Yeah.
in the insanity of it all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, mine is an unusual story, I think. I don't know.
You know, it's different, but I don't think it's unusual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I appreciate, though, the detail, because it probably was helpful to a lot of people, for at least them to be asking questions, and if not for themselves, people either in their family or people that they sponsor. And so all of our experiences are valuable in our lives to be applied either to ourselves or to others. So thanks very much for sharing that. All right, team, that was really good. Begin looking at assignment number, well, finish the questions as you've been doing on the worksheet on the body, but also begin looking at assignment number 4. I think it's time for us to go into the mind part. Pay attention to assignment number 4, item number 1, but only a part of that, and the reading part, page 23 to page 35. Page 23 to page 35 in the big book, because there's a lot of substance in that material, and then there's a lot of substance in the balance of the reading, which we'll take a look at the following week. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.